All right, tonight we're speaking to the lawyer who would like to retrieve about 60 billion rand from South African banks for alleged abuse when it comes to home repossessions. An application was filed with the Constitutional Court on Wednesday, asking for direct access to the highest court. And 225 applicants say they've been the victims of abuse by the banks. They all reportedly fell into arrears. They say their homes were then auctioned off for a measly sum compared to the market value. Well, to discuss, we're joined by Advocate Douglas Shaw, who's working with Lungelo, Lethu Human Rights Foundation on the case. Thank you for being with us,
Good
Douglas.
evening, Francis.
So, how badly behaved are these banks in your view?
Very badly behaved indeed. In fact, I think our practice is probably the worst in the world. I've been doing a PhD in this subject, and I've looked at probably 20 or 30 countries, so I can't be sure there's not somebody that's worse. But certainly amongst developing countries that I've looked at, our practice is the worst in two ways. Firstly, we sell for far less than other countries. Nobody else in the world I've found is selling properties for 100 Rand and 1,000 Rand.
I even saw 10 Rand.
10 Rand.
Is that actually possible?
I've got a spreadsheet that's probably got 400 or 500 prices like that kind of. And look, they're probably for houses that aren't worth 1 million. They're probably worth 200,000 or 300,000, but still.
It's amazing if true.
Ridiculous.
And this means that people can get into arrears, lose their home, lose all the value in that home, land up paying the bank for the rest of their lives perhaps.
Exactly.
When if the sale was fair, they could actually retrieve a bit of money.
Exactly.
Is that
for many people, that's all the money they ever have is what they store up in their house. So we've seen people at 65, 70 living in a reasonable house and either having to go back and live in shacks in the township at an old age, just because of this bad process, when actually they had equity, even if the bank had to repossess, which often they don't, but even if it had, at least that person could come out with enough money to rent for the rest of their life after working all their years.
Now, it could be said it goes through the banks, then eventually it's handed over to the sheriffs.
That's
the
correct.
banks don't do the sales.
Correct.
So why are you going after the banks and not the sheriffs?
Right, that's a good question.
Officers?
The answer is that the sheriff has no discretion. If the bank sends it to the sheriff's got to sell it. So it's the bank that makes the decision to send it to the sheriff. And the bank should have stopped doing that 20, 30 years ago. They should have said, this system isn't working, it's causing abuse to our clients, the sheriff is unable to sell the property to guarantee a certain price, let's change the system. That's what the bank should have done the first or the second or the third time this happened. They shouldn't have done another 100,000 times. I mean, that's gross negligence, and maybe even it could be considered criminal because the banks do it with intent. They realise this is going to happen and they reconcile themselves to the possibility or the probability that that damage will occur.
I was looking at the statements released by the banks. They all say this sale in execution, I think it's called, is an absolute final resort. FNB has a process to help their clients. Nedbank says we do everything to try and rehabilitate the loan. Do you buy that?
I don't buy it at all. I know that that's what they say, that's their line, and some of them might even believe it, but the stats are that our banks sell 5 times as much compared to the number of mortgages as other countries, so obviously not. And then in our own personal experience with our clients, we find we go to the bank and we say, look, we've got an offer to purchase here, please stop this sale in execution, and they'll say, no, we're selling it anyway. Or even we've had clients, some of the applicants in this case.
So you can prove that that has happened?
Oh, many, 200, 300, 400 times we can show that the bank has sold properties when there was other options possible. The Constitutional Court says it must be a last resort. The banks are selling in lots of circumstances where it's not a last resort.
These banking personnel, what worries me, they have access to information. So they know a property is going on auction and it may not get anywhere near the value. You could tell your friends, for example, I think there need to be checks and balances. But even more shocking, and you really have to tell me how you can claim this, that the banks themselves are involved and then buying the houses back.
There's two senses in this happens, and it's not always the case. But one is that the banks take properties into possession. So that's when the bank goes to the auction, and it's a kind of slightly legitimate reason in the sense that they say that it was 200,000 owed, then the bank will sometimes, not always, but bid that 200,000 so that they at least get the money that they're owed, and then they'll sell it on. Now, some of the banks say that they pass on the gain to the client, but I've never seen that actually happen in practice. So often they buy them up and then they sell them on and keep the profit.
So wait, so they auction it off and then buy it and then sell it again anyway.
Yeah.
So it's a duplicate process.
Well, once they've bought it, it's theirs now. It's not the client's. And so if they buy it for a low price and then they sell it on, then technically speaking, they get to keep that profit. And I think there should be an investigation as to just exactly how much they've made over the years from this and whether they should pass that on to the clients who they're now chasing for the shortfall, even though they've made the money.
No, this is absolutely incredible. The respondents are the big banks, but the credit regulator, the Justice Minister as well, the Human Rights Commission, and the High Court Rules Board. Why are they all involved?
Right. It's because they've got an interest in the matter. We're not looking for orders against them. They all see that...
So you're not saying they're not doing their job?
No, we're not. But they're in general very sympathetic to this case. They also, the NCR, the Ministry of Justice, the Rules Board has also been changing rules and stuff, and certainly the South African Human Rights, they all believe there's a problem here and we want to change it. And they've all got an interest, like a constitutionally defined interest in this matter, and so we want to hear from them what their views are and how the system should change.
It sounds like if you get your way, firstly, the directors of banks could be held responsible. Also, there will be a freeze, basically, on repossessions under most circumstances. But now, isn't that problematic? Because if you think about it, you get the best price if estate agents are involved.
We think so,
They cost, though. It takes longer, which is bad for the person getting more in debt. The banks, it's bad for them as well. They do need to make a profit. And won't that lead to them tightening up lending? So in the end, it'll be harder for everybody to get a bond.
Right. I don't think so. I'll tell you why. Even though our banks sell far more properties in execution than they should, it's still a very small percentage of the total number of bonds. So even if it gets a little bit more expensive, and it's not necessarily going to be more expensive, it's just a different system, but even if it does get more expensive, if you spread that cost over all the bonds, the extra cost of credit is tiny. So we don't anticipate that the cost of credit will go up. It's a criteria. It's something to think about, because we, in designing a new system, have had to think about that. So we don't want to be unreasonable to the banks either, but we want to bring it into some kind of balance.
They are businesses.
Yeah, no, they must make money. Of course they must, but they can make money. Other places in the world have much more reasonable systems where they don't do all these things that our banks do. The banks still make money. In fact, I think they make more money, and they're not as hated as our banks are for doing these kind of things. I mean, if you do this to somebody, all their friends are going to think you're bad forever. And I'm sure the marketing people at the banks are saying, why are you doing this, legal people? Because you're destroying our brands. But it's not everybody at the bank that wants to continue with this. A lot of them are saying, why are we doing this?
Okay, so in finality, how did you get involved? How did these applicants come together, mostly from Gauteng townships? And I don't know if you have one or two stories, real stories of what these people have faced. Well,
sure. They're not all from townships. There's a lot of suburban people of all races and genders and backgrounds, rich and poor, that have also had this kind of experience. But when I first heard about this, I actually didn't believe it. I said, no, banks would never do that. It's completely irrational. There must be some explanation. And then as I got more and more people coming to see me, and I heard that they were doing this, I just had a sense of injustice about it. I just thought, this is completely wrong. How can this be? And so when King Sibiye and his people from the townships came to see me, I was already feeling that this was something that needed to change. And I knew they weren't going to be able to pay me proper fees for the thing. But I just thought, no, I'm going to help them, because it's just so wrong. And then through that, I met the Minister of Justice, because they were connected to them, and I got an opportunity to explain to him. And through that, I also met the Human Rights Commission, and the thing progressed. So it actually worked out really well. We worked well together.
All right, well, thank you. We'll follow the case. I can just say that we did offer the banks an opportunity to respond. They didn't want to speak live, but most of them have released statements saying that they will defend themselves, that they are following the law, and as we were discussing, that this is a last resort. We will follow that.